Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about.
Welcome back to L&D Disrupt Live. This is the first one of the year, and I'm excited to say that this time I'm joined by Bastian Eichler, who is the VP of Product at WorkMotion. And today we're going to tackle this topic of global talent. How do we find it? How do we attract it? How do we develop people? And really trying to build an approach that we can apply and scale over time. So, Bastian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gary. Very, very honored to be here.
Cool. So I guess we can start with a bit of context for sort of why we're having this conversation today. There was this recent piece of research from Korn Ferry that said by the year 2030, there could be 85 million jobs that are unfilled because people don't have the skills to fill them. And really, I think the last part of that is the important part for today's conversation, because if there aren't enough skilled people, and the volume of vacancies is as high as that is, then we need to kind of cast a wider net when it comes to looking for talent. We also need to think strategically about where we look for talent, what's important to talent because it's more competitive. And then also, if we're lacking skills, we need to think about that development part that we often discuss as well. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, Bastian, what are your thoughts on that in general, that research and this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a very impressive number, right? 85 million people. That's more than the population of Germany. And by the year 2030, these are the people missing in all of the industrial countries, in Germany, UK, France, no matter where you're from, they're missing. You cannot fill your positions with people available in the market anymore. And I think lots of HR professionals also in this call can already sing a song about that today. There are many positions that are not easy to fill at all in your own home country with talents that if you're a UK company, you could find in the UK or in one of the countries where you have a local presence yourself. So basically, I mean, in the past, there were huge government programs where we had something like this, right? I can tell from Germany, we had like in the post-war history, we had people coming out of Italy, out of Turkey, out of India, when we had like our first shortage of tech talent. But these are like huge government programs, right? They don't help you right now in the situation you are in. Basically, if you want to hire someone right now, a good talent, you don't find them in your own country. Of course, the perfect dream is just do it internationally. Just hire wherever you want from. And this basically is also what WorkMotion is doing, supporting our customers in doing that. But yeah, this big dream of just like hiring from anywhere you want, it's not so easy to solve in reality.
No, exactly. And I know we've spoken about this briefly before, but what are sort of the common things people overlook or miss when they're trying to hire global talent? Because I think there's a lot of things. We think it's probably quite simple in theory, but in practice, I bet it's a different beast.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first thought would be like the classical thought of every people manager usually is like, okay, do we set up a local presence there, right? But it's like a very costly, a very timely process. Just because you, for example, no, you don't find software engineers right now anymore in the UK. Why should you set up right away an entity, for example, in Estonia? Maybe there is a lot of talent currently available there. If you don't set up an entity, you basically have big problems in hiring a talent from there. Even if you do, you have to consider all the things connected to hiring someone there. You have to know about the local compliance rules. How do you set even up a locally compliant contract in that country? How do you make sure that you pay the right employer's contribution, the social contributions, and so on? How do you manage the payroll of the talent in this country? How do you even do a payment in that country? Is that so easy to do a payment from the UK to certain countries? No, it isn't. So all of these questions arise. It's quite complicated. It makes you very inflexible when you think about setting up your own entities. And this is why it's great to work with WorkMotion or a similar provider, because we can make this very, very easy for you to hire anywhere you want, anyone who you would like to hire.
Yeah. And I think you teed us up nicely there to talk about this first part about finding the right talent. So often I think people either do it quite scattergun, or they think it's like a self-fulfilling thing. Like, we say we're hiring globally now, and we're just going to get talent from a whole bunch of places. But really all they're doing is mentioning that you can work anywhere in a job description, and adding that job description just on every site that operates globally. But you mentioned a good point there. We can use existing data to hone in on markets that might be useful in terms of finding talent. So that Estonia one is a good example. Essentially, from the age of 7, every child in Estonia is taught how to code. So if we're looking for coders, then we might be able to use that data as a basis to say, here's a good market where we can strategically find people.
Yeah, very correct. So, I mean, that's also something we are looking into with our customers together, because we started as a typical employer of record provider. And so if you want to know the details about how this model works, of how we can make it possible for you, look for a conversation with me afterwards. I can explain you all the details about how this employer of record model works. But it's the point of time where typically customers came to us so far, where they said, we have this software engineer, maybe in Argentina, that we want to hire. Can we do it through you? And this is very easy for us to do by now. And we can make this a big pleasure for you as an experience. But how do you approach this strategically? Like you said, I mean, many companies right now already adapted to this mindset. We have a lot of great customers who build awesome international teams, but only few of them do this with a real strategic approach on, like, where do we even hire? Where do we look for the talent? Our view usually is quite subjective. I can include myself. I have made good experience with, for example, hiring people from Egypt. So this is, of course, like, for me, a country where I know, okay, great. Like, I know I can find great product management or software engineering talent in this country. But how do I expand my mind about what other countries could be out there? And this is, for example, something where we work together with our customers also looking into, okay, how can we do that? What factors play a role in that decision? Which countries are interesting for me? So we built, for example, a country explorer where you can give basically some requirements. What are you looking for? Like, for you, proficiency English level is very important. You want to have someone who's really able to speak very good English. You want to have a country with a good tertiary education. You want to look for countries maybe with a very good digital infrastructure. We all work remotely. You don't like that we have, like, all the time connection problems, stuff like this. And of course, you're looking, especially in times of recessions, into budget, right? I mean, budget plays a big role right now, I think, in many people departments' minds with the year 2023 coming up. So we also say budget and average salaries and average employer contributions in a country play a role for me. So give us all this data, and basically we can recommend for you, based on analysis we do, which countries could be of interest. So Gary, if you put in your requirements there and tell us what you basically looking for, we can tell you, hey, have you thought about hiring in Portugal, in Romania, or in Egypt? And then also give you some further recommendation on how to do this, because it's not that easy. You cannot just, like, say, yeah, cool, let's use LinkedIn and put a LinkedIn announcement for Egypt. Do you know if Egyptian employees look on LinkedIn for your job description? Do you know how your job description has to look like? These are all questions where we can guide you to. We can also connect you to the right partners. And I think, like, adapting such a strategic view is the next steps for many of the companies. Not just saying, yes, we are open to hire from everywhere and just wait for talent to come to you. This will not happen. But to strategically say, I identify some markets where I think there I can find some awesome talent. And we try to help you to find that countries.
Yeah, exactly. You made a great point there as well. So once people have that data about where they can look for the right people, it's also about the channels. So it's not a case of simply finding the right market and using whatever channel you would use on your end. It's about, well, typically 90% of job applications happen through referrals, for example, in this market, or only 10% of people in that country use LinkedIn. So you're not going to be that strategic if you only do that first part. So identify the market, I guess, then find out the channels that work in that country for applications. And then also part of that is leveraging a network as well, isn't it? Like, often an overlooked thing is how well you might have a connection in that region who can advise you either on those channels or who can share it with their network, those kind of things, right?
Exactly. And that's also like something where you need a good partner who can connect you to the right partners that you're looking for. And if you know you want to hire in a certain country, who's the partner you should work with? For example, we have a great network of recruitment partner agencies where we know exactly what strength they have in terms of markets. We can connect you based on your current open positions with the right partners. And I think that's an extremely important step. Just don't use any global provider where you don't know which is really their big strengths in terms of markets, but you should really take one where you can be sure they will be able to find you the best talent in this very market you're looking for. And in general, I think like something that also shouldn't be overlooked, you need a lot of country-specific knowledge. That's something, for example, that for us also is very important to share that with our customers. You need to know like what kind of offer do I have to make an employee? How should the job announcement look like, but also how should the contract at the end look like, right? What are the typical conditions of someone working from that country in terms of what you put in the contract in paid time off or notice period, salary-wise? Other added benefits to the country? Is there something country-specific, like meal vouchers, which is always expected in that country? And if you don't offer it, then you will have a hard time convincing employees to join you, and a disadvantage against every local employer that, of course, is competing with you for that same employee.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. You can't pitch your value effectively if you don't understand what's valued in that place. So it's a real balancing act. And something you mentioned there as well is about, or just before that was about understanding the viability of a particular region. And I think that straddles this kind of finding and attracting part is being more data driven or data led. So you made a great point there that you might not know if it's profitable to set up a location or a fixed office in a location, but by hiring global staff, you could then use performance data to understand how to hire, where to grow. So for example, if we were in a sales team and we were very much Europe focused and we wanted to open something maybe in the US, we could hire 4 or 5 people there if we know that's the right market to hire people based on the previous things we just said, but then also use a testing mindset. So, okay, 6 months down the line, what do those people do well? And therefore, is that a viable market to hire more people? And then also, are we now driving sales in that region? And therefore, does performance data tell us it's worth scaling there to the point where we might need to? And that's part of that strategic conversation as well, right?
Definitely. And we see exactly this. Some of our clients do already very, very well. They basically use our possibilities of hiring people everywhere to maybe get that one talent that they couldn't get, but also to strategically build up, for example, hubs. I say, hey, let's try to see if we can build up a tech hub in a certain region. We don't want to, we are not completely sure about this. So let's not invest in all this infrastructure over there with our own entity and so on. We can still do that at a point of time, but let's try it out first, see the data on how it works, and then we can still decide how to move on from there. Same goes for, like you said, exploring markets where you maybe want to grow in sales. I think in the past, this was something not easily to expand from your own country, right, into other countries and like set up a sales network there and conquer the market also from the sales side. You can really very well test a market with very low costs involved. You hire some people there, try to set it up small, see some first small successes, feel if there is really a market for you to conquer, and then you decide how to move on. And I think these new possibilities that we have, combined with the willingness to have such a remote or hybrid setup, enables companies to grow much better and much more strategic than in the past.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a never ending thing as well. Like you can refine it over time. You know, you might test it out and work out this is more viable for us. So you add 5 more people, but then you might go down a level on the data and you might say, well, actually, we hired a bunch of people in this region because the data showed that they might be really good at X. But then when we dig into the performance data, we might say they are really good at X, but they also need to develop Y if we're going to reach the performance goals. So I would recommend that people apply that mindset continually, you know, like, we're never finishing testing, we're never finishing scaling to a degree. And also you might find that you need to scale something back, right? You might hire 5 people in a region. It doesn't go as you hoped, and you can dig into why, and then you can maybe scale back and say, we'll try it somewhere else. And I think that's an important thing as well. It's not sinking too much money into something before you know whether it works, right? I guess you see that with a lot of customers as well.
Yes, 100%. You hit it on the nail there, Gary. And customers value this flexibility, and they can see the positive impact it has on them. And so we see like companies grow into that. Often we have customers who at the beginning are not sure about how this model works, if it's something for them. But as soon as they see the first successes, they see the value of it. They see the value of the flexibility for them. They see the value of the flexibility for their employees. This suddenly changes a lot for them in their mindset, and we see a huge turnaround, and suddenly they adapt their complete strategy going this way. We have companies like large e-commerce companies, for example, acting out of Germany, who basically have this remote first approach, who don't see any kind of boundaries in where they should hire. It's rather the opposite. They encourage their hiring managers to look abroad.
And one thing we've probably been alluding to, but not quite explicitly said, is this allows hiring teams or HR teams or whatever team you're in to create a better story about impact and about how you're spending budget. And, you can make evidence for the case that this model does work for us, or you can make a good case for, look at what we would have spent hiring or setting up an office in this region, and look at, therefore, the productivity and profitability. Are you in the same mindset as that, Bastian?
Yes, exactly. We at WorkMotion apply the same mindset, by the way. I can tell you we currently have 56 different nationalities in our team of like 300 employees, around 56 different nationalities working out of 36 different countries. And we do exactly the same as you just told. Yeah, we evaluating, of course, very detailed. We have generally a very nice feedback and evaluation setup in the company that helps us to see also, okay, like what works and what doesn't work, right? And how do we adapt this then in the future hiring process? We know by now certain regions. I told you, for example, my personal experience with Egypt, right? I know by now there's great talent in Egypt. I didn't know before. Many people I talk to are surprised when I tell them, there's a really hot startup scene in Egypt, in Cairo, also in Alexandria a bit. And there are great people. And I get questions isn't English a big problem or something? I say, look, the English proficiency of someone who went to university in Egypt is better than someone from Spain. So what are we talking about? You would never question that from hiring someone from Spain, right? So, I think this approach is something we live ourselves. We see a lot of our successful customers doing the same, and I can only recommend it for anyone else.
Yeah, I guess the big thing is you're not building on assumptions there, like you just mentioned. If we're going back to the very first thing we spoke about, we're using real-time data about markets we want to find talent in. Therefore, that allows us to not make assumptions about hiring in particular locations. And I guess if there's any best practices or principles you could share from that evaluation process, maybe people could apply today? Like, are there one or two things you think work really well about this evaluate the global approach?
Well, I think, first of all, you should have, I don't know what system you have in place, right? But we have a system in place with a software that supports us to do quarterly evaluations together with our team members. We also apply a full 360-degree feedback culture, where also every peer can give you feedback, where you receive feedback from your team member as a direct manager. And we can also, we also try, of course, to put this into some quantitative measurements. And by analyzing this data, yes, we can see some certain tendencies. Do we only act on those? No, of course. It's at the end, of course, individual performance, and we have to look into each individual team member and what this really means. But the data can give you some hints, hey, this really turned out to be a good strategic decision to go for the Egyptian market, for example. That's why we follow this strategy further on. And this is, for example, something we can do in general. I think having, and maybe we come also already to one part further, having a strong goal system in general in place, and something where you have strong metrics regarding, we have an OKR system in place, objectives and key results, where we very strongly measure the result of every key result we're working on. This helps you a lot also in this regards, to really make sure you know exactly where your team stands and where you might to work on improvements.
Yeah. It's a great point. We probably missed a little bit at the start, but it is, before you even go to that point of working out which markets you want to hire in, it's like, what is the performance problem or the goal or the metric that drove you here in the first place? It's all well and good saying we want to expand the sales team, but why? Like, is it because you get 20% of your website traffic is from a region where you don't have salespeople? Like, there will be a real metric that drove you there in the first place. And if you do understand that, you can go away and be more strategic, like we've been preaching so far. Just to remind people, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, or if you have any sort of follow-up points to anything Bastian and I have spoken about so far. I feel like we're having an honest conversation. We've talked about some pros and cons, and that leads us nicely to the sort of benefits and challenges of hiring globally. And I know you have personal experience in this, but I suppose a lot of people are thinking about finance and budget. So, like, we want to, obviously hiring globally can often help our budget go further, but at the same time, we need to make sure we're benchmarking salaries, we're being transparent, we're making sure that we are paying people a rate that's commensurate with the cost of living where they are. So that's probably one of the big ones, but how do people navigate that?
Yeah, it's a good point. Interestingly, I read a nice article, or an interesting article last week about something in the US, a trend for 23 in HR, which was called quiet hiring. I've not heard this term before, but people basically looking to how can they replace certain parts of the job, for example, by hiring freelancers, because the budget doesn't allow to hire a full-time employee, which I find kind of concerning. I mean, we're here in the learning and development podcast. I don't think like I have to explain anyone the value of having a real employee and being able to train them and have them part of the team compared to having a freelancer in the team. But the budget restriction shouldn't be a stop for you necessarily to hire full-time employees somewhere. I mean, you pay a lot of money for a freelancer, and for this money, you could find someone in a more low-wage country. Like, going back, I always come back to the Egypt example for us because it's, for me, from personal experience, so easy to talk about this. But the price you pay for a software engineer or a product manager in Egypt, that's like a third or a fourth of what you pay, for example, for the same person with the same competence level in Germany. And for me, there is no difference in the quality of work that they bring. I have a mixed team. In my product team, I have or had team members from Egypt, from Germany, from Turkey, from Moldova, from India, and from Tajikistan. Okay. And these are all great talents.
Yeah.
And they had great competence. I could not tell you that like one of them had like a better education just because they were from Germany. And I think that reshapes your thoughts about thinking about budgets. And for example, we think about budget and salaries that we pay our employees. We always look at also a fair compensation that is equivalent to the living standard in the country. For example, if we hire a software engineer in Egypt, of course, he is not getting the same wage for the same position as a software engineer in Germany. Why? Because the cost of living, of course, in Egypt is a complete different one. So we have salary bands, country-specific salary bands prepared by our people and culture team for each country. That is one of our focus markets. We know exactly what is the typical salary range. It's a competitive salary range on local market standards. So compared to Egyptian employers, we are having an attractive salary package, but of course it's not the same salary package as if you would get if you're in Germany. Also, we have a lot of flexible people in the team, digital nomads that change their location from time to time. If you change your location and you move to a country where we have higher or lower costs of living, of course, we will also adapt the salary accordingly. It only is fair in the sense of fairness in wages between different team members with the same competences, with the same amount of responsibility.
Yeah. And I guess a part of that as well is, like you alluded to earlier, is understanding the local culture. So do you kind of apply benefits consistently across the team, or does that kind of tweak over time? Like, for example, I used to work in a marketing team that was half in the UK, half in the US, and it always felt really bad when it came to booking off holiday, because I think just because of the cultural norms of the two countries, we would get like more than double what they got in terms of holiday. So you would have to say it quietly if you had like 2 weeks off, because that was someone else's yearly allowance, So does that come into it as well, like consistency of benefits?
Yes, I would not say we apply you can apply certain consistency across different countries, but there are also different cultures and different ways of how you deal. For example, with vacations, there are some countries, like you say, which have a lot of national holidays automatically, where you get a lot of free days just on top. Also, there are some, like I said, country-specific benefits that don't play a role in a certain country. Like in Germany, we don't worry so much about health insurance, because health insurance is like basically a large public system that we have. No one is asking for additional health insurance as a benefit, while in other countries, this plays a role, right? So you should take into consideration the local differences, and we do that. And I have not experienced that this leads to some kind of envy or something between the team members, that they say, oh, they do get this kind of benefit and I get this kind of benefit. We have a lot of benefits that we roll out globally. Learning and development budget, for example, is indeed the same for every employee in euro values. So if you have a educational course in Egypt, of course, you have theoretically a little higher budget on learning and development than someone from Europe. But yeah, these are like the details of it. Yeah, I hope this answered your question, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it is that idea of working out what's important to people there. So we talked about maybe stuff from the employer perspective there, but if we think about those first numbers we looked at, there's going to be a lot of vacancies and fewer people to fill them. So we need to be really aware of what's important to global talent. So I actually have some statistics here that maybe I'll rattle off to you quick fire style, and then you can let me know if you have any thoughts on some of these. But one of them is I actually took two of these from WorkMotion's website as well, and I'll include the blog post in there, so I'm not doing your content team a disservice, because I would hate it if someone did that to me. But 24% of candidates are skeptical of promises that companies make about things like job expectations, benefits, perks, and the culture. So there needs to be that sort of clarity. And I guess part of this comes back to employer brand. Like, it's quite easy to say these are the company culture, perks, benefits, how we benchmark salary, but do things like your Glassdoor or what your people are saying when they're acting as advocates, does that match up? So yeah, that was kind of the first stat on this one.
Yeah, I can completely relate to this. And based on my WorkMotion experience, I can tell you, for example, it's the first time I work for a remote first company. Of course, during COVID, everyone worked remotely, right? But it's my first time in a remote first company, and I couldn't imagine that working together in such a remote culture can work so perfectly. Also, the personal relationships I've built up at WorkMotion, they're somehow maybe even stronger than in some of the companies where I worked day in, day out in an office. And it's a very strong culture that is also mirrored by every newbie that comes in. I'm also part of the culture committee at WorkMotion. I always ask new joiners about how they describe the feeling of working at WorkMotion. And I think we invest a lot of time and resources in helping our employees to adapt to a remote work setting, to connect to each other. And I like your statistic about the right goals. We also invest a lot in talking about our goals as a company, about our OKRs. Generally, in a remote setting, one thing I learned, over-communicating is not a thing. You cannot over-communicate. It's just you can just communicate not enough. And especially when it comes about where are we going? What are the objectives we have? And how does it relate to your daily work that you are doing? And how can we support you keep the focus and not work on things that are nice little flowers along the way, but they just stand in the way from us to getting right on the path to the goal we want to achieve? That's something we invest so much time and resources in. And I really see this also, that it has such a positive effect on the culture, on how people perceive their own job, their responsibility. And I think that is also what they feedback us then as a big part of the WorkMotion culture.
Yeah. And I guess if we're in that middle part still about attracting talent, the more you have these micro case studies of people that work remotely and have good things to say, the more that's going to reflect when people do their own research during the hiring process. And you're right there about that over communication point. So I found this stat about essentially as we were coming out of COVID, so it's end of 2021, I think, 68% felt that the approach to remote working wasn't clearly communicated. So essentially, clarity is massively important to people who work in global and remote settings. And I think you kind of covered that quite nicely there. And the last one, which is really interesting, is more than 80% said that they had or wanted autonomy in how they work, and that this would have a direct carryover into how productive and motivated they were. And we will come to this, I think, in more detail. But I think having that clarity about what the job's actually going to be like as you try to attract people, establishing clear guidelines about how much autonomy you have, because it doesn't make sense to be a global or remote employee and then be micromanaged. I wouldn't apply for a job like that unless I had a sense that I was going to get space to do it my own way.
Yeah, and also, like, is remote work really something you take seriously as an employer? Is a complete legitimate question. I mean, I see so many companies right now, especially like big corporates who, like Microsoft and so on, they like all say, hey, come back to the office, and they celebrate it if it's something that is good. And it's not our research only, like what we can see with our customers, our employees, like a lot of surveys out there you will find, which shows that especially the Gen Z employees, they won't appreciate this at all. And they will not work long-term for an employer who doesn't allow them to work flexible. And flexible doesn't mean you can just like take like the afternoon off one day or something. Like, I think that's a very old-fashioned view on flexibility. Flexibility means really I can work from wherever I want, whenever I want. And I can adapt working to a way that it fits to my personal life. I think that's something that we see very strong, especially in the youngest generation hitting the labor market. And if you don't adapt to this, if you just have remote work as like a disguise, but in reality, you don't really facilitate that, you will fail to attract the real good talent in the market.
Yeah. And a big part of that is something we, again, alluded to, but didn't call out specifically, is writing different job descriptions for different markets. It's not enough to just create one blanket job description and send it out, because, like you said, if we're talking about flexible working, and let's say, for example, the cultural working pattern in that country is maybe people start late and finish early, or, people finish early, start late. There might be religious reasons around people wanting to work at different times. There might be a culture that's particularly family oriented. So people might want more flexibility in terms of, I need to be there to drop my kids off in the morning. I want to be there for late night. There's a whole bunch of different things that if you just write one job description and send it everywhere, you're really not being that targeted. So, if we go back to the very start, if we identify the right markets, we can build a right job description, and therefore we can attract people in a more crowded place, can't we?
Definitely. Let me tell you one anecdote from my team about this, because I love this so much. It was one of the most enjoyable moments for me. Last year, the first time, I have a team with 6 team members from Egypt. And in Egypt, of course, the month of Ramadan is something extremely important. Of course, I knew Ramadan. I had before German employees who were Muslim, but they didn't celebrate Ramadan this strictly. They didn't practice it in the way like it's practiced in the Middle East or in Egypt. So for me, it was a completely new situation as a team lead. And I think for some people, it might sound scary at the beginning to think about, wow, okay, you have a full month of a big part of your team not eating and drinking correctly. So it will influence their performance. No one can perform if they don't eat and drink the full day at 100%. It's impossible. And you have to take into consideration that they have some important religious-driven family events that they need to attend. But we embraced it, and we really sat together with the team, thinking together about what we can do. And, for example, agreed on there will be no common meeting, no joint team meeting after 4 p.m. Why? Because after 4 p.m., everyone starts, at least the Muslim or strictly practicing Ramadan part of the team, start praying, start preparing food together with their family, gathering up, to, at the end, when the sun goes down, start drinking and eating. And you cannot have meetings after 4, which sounds terrible at first because you lose at least 2 hours of work per day. But then it comes to taking the advantage of flexible work again, of remote work, and saying, look, a lot of work can be done asynchronously. So it's completely fine, and we can adapt to your individual needs. I had team members who worked from after they ate from 10 p.m. to 12 p.m. They say, yeah, I just cover it up in those 2 hours afterwards. I had some team members who said, no, that's not my thing. I get up very early in the morning, like 4:30, 5 a.m., because the sun is still down. I can still eat and drink. That's good. And I work from there. at this time. And it worked. We just had to find a good mode of doing it. And of course, I saw that in this time, I didn't get maybe the 100% of what the team would be capable of doing, but I also saw the big effect it had on the team. Mm-hmm. And I can only compare it as a Christian to the Christmas time, which I also always like. It's not a time of relaxation, I can tell you, but I always come out refreshed because of all the nice moments I could share with my family, the nice encounters you had during that time, the celebrations you had, and I could see that spirit in my team, and I could see at the end when they had the Festival of Aid and came back how recharged they were. And I think that's one of the beauties of working in a real global remote team, that you also have those mixed culture, mixed religions. You learn a lot. For me, it's like a personal experience that I wouldn't want to miss. And I think we can also prove, at least in WorkMotion, that this can work if you just embrace it. You are flexible in your mind and you try to find solution how to work with your team in such a situation.
Yeah. Exactly. And that ticks a lot of the things we spoke about already. It's understanding what matters in that market to people, to talent as you hire them, building a team and a culture that actually reflects how you can work together globally. I bet your team have lots of great things to say now about how they work together. If they were to be invited onto a reference call for someone who's applying for a job, or if someone reached out to them and said, look, I see you're in the team at WorkMotion doing this, what is it really like? That you're building that credibility and the fact that you're not just saying you do things, you're doing them in practice, and then you've got examples. So that, it's really nice to hear. And it leads us nicely onto the third part of the equation, which is developing talent. And I know essentially you've talked about it a little bit, but I know there's a few ways that you kind of collaborate as a dispersed team, that you get together physically at different times, some methods you use to speed up collaboration without the distance or geographical spread being a sort of hindrance. So tell us a bit more about, from your experience, how you develop talent in a global team.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about communication, right? Communication is key. So try to facilitate communication as much as you can among your team. I couldn't imagine a world working with a team without Slack, to be honest. Slack is just such a low-key, easy way of communicating with others, to easily build some groups, to add people from groups, to create channels where you can post different kind of stuff that is of interest to people. It's really one of the most essential tools I could think of. Also, we use, for example, I'm not paid by Slack or anything, right? But I really like the tool, and they have such small things like the huddle functionality. I don't know if you know that, but the huddle functionality allows you, with just a click of a button, to have a joint phone call with someone. You don't have to set up a Google Hangout or a Zoom meeting or something. You just click a button and you can be connected to anyone in the company immediately. So it's almost the feeling of hey, and you get pinged. Someone wants to talk to me. And it's showing up at the desk of someone, just without being so intrusive and maybe distracting the person, because still the person can decide to accept it or not. But you can be immediately in the conversation if you want to. We use this functionality a lot. We use tools like Miro, which I think is a great tool for remote teams to share ideas, to collaboratively work in some form of workshops. I'm a very big fan of design thinking. I use a lot of those methods in my team. I do a lot of workshops where we think about concepts in the product team, how to make things better for our customers. And I couldn't imagine 3 or 4 years ago to have such kind of workshops work really well remotely, but with the right tools, for example, Miro, you can do that, and you can even bring it to an additional level, because a lot of things you couldn't do, working on the same whiteboard at the same time on different ends, for example. We try to also use other technology, there are, for example, tools like Wonder, which enable you to easily meet up together. I don't know if you heard of that one. There are similar ones like this, where you can very easily meet up together in a room without having the feeling you have to set up a calendar entry and something like this. So technology plays a big role. We use a lot of this, of course, as a technology company. We like this a lot, but it's not only that, it's also the way of how you work, right? So, for example, we encourage people to do stuff asynchronously. Don't try in a remote setup to imitate a situation that you would have to do in an office. You don't need to do that. You don't need to have a meeting for everything. It's not necessary anymore. Still, I see like some calendars of people being crowded with meeting after meeting after meeting, which is completely unnecessary, because a lot of things you can do by, for example, creating a short 5-minute video. It's just an information you put somewhere in a Slack channel and you ask people to just give you a comment underneath this thread.
Yeah.
So much more time efficient.
Yeah. I think that's part of it, is that setting the ground rules for how you're going to work together as a remote team comes into a big part of how you develop, because like you said, it's like, well, how are we going to use Slack? Like, if you're focusing on a project, can you create a relevant channel? If you need to learn from other people rather than jumping on a meeting, can you do like a Slack channel where you add the people you know can help you troubleshoot problems in real time? Like you said, what's the best way for us to experience this consistently? So you mentioned that Loom video there. That's not a case of, if we work in the same office, I show you on one screen and then I send a quick Loom video to someone else who works in a different location, because essentially I'm giving you one level of experience and I'm giving everyone else like a second tier kind of experience of it. And I've seen a couple of good examples from HowNow customers that do that, but essentially like during onboarding, they'll upload the deck that's going to be used for like an online Zoom style session. And then people can look at it before, they can load it up on their screen so that everyone can see it in the same quality and size, and then people can access it afterwards. So yeah, I think some of the things you speak to there it's about how we establish the ground rules for how we learn together, and then how we also cut back on wasted time and what's the best channel for this one thing.
Exactly. And we not only talk about this, we also try to really be innovative in this way. We, for example, had last year, we already 2023, last year had an event called the Employer of the Future event, where I invited like speakers from all different backgrounds to share their experience and their thoughts of like how the workplace of tomorrow, the remote workplace, especially of tomorrow, should look like, and what does this mean for us? And what do we need to change and how to adapt? And of course, we not only try to sponsor and create such an event, we try to apply this for us as well, which is why, for example, our people culture team has set up a remote academy where we really try to educate our employees on how to work in such a remote culture the best way, where it is about, for example, asynchronous work. How do you really do this, right? It's about productivity. How do you make sure that you stay productive, that you can multitask? Also, what do OKRs really mean for you? And should you only focus on what you should do, or does focusing also mean not doing other things? Like, one of the main tools that I use is a not to-do list for my team members. Hey, don't do this. This is out of the focus. Feedback culture. How do we give feedback to each other? Extremely important. And I think the feedback culture at WorkMotion is the best out of any company I have worked at so far, even though we are in a remote setting. Why? Because we put so much emphasis on this. And also, of course, topics like mental health play a big role. We always do big initiatives of trying to help our people also to relax and get their thoughts away just from the standard work stuff, and also be conscious about themselves and how they work, how it is affecting them. So all of this is part of the remote academy, and it's just one of the examples how we also try to also adapt new methodologies and new ways of working in our own stuff.
Yeah, I love this idea of a not to-do list, because actually I think sometimes what's lacking is self-awareness of the things that are counterproductive, especially when it comes to learning. Like, for example, you could create a not to-do list for your company that says, before you ask someone on Slack, search on our internal system. There might be a resource there already, right? That's I might have to write one of these not to-do list things for L&D so we can help solve a lot of these pain points. But Bastian, are there any tools in particular that you use for feedback collection that make it such a sort of useful process at WorkMotion?
Yeah, we have a software called Leapsum. I think it's a smaller software, but it does the job quite well of having regular feedbacks, not only in a quarterly feedback session that is mandatory. So it's a software supporting the process of a quarterly feedback talk that you should have anyway, with selecting peers who can give you feedback, getting feedback from your direct manager, doing some self-evaluation, having some talk together to bring this in alignment. But also it gives you the possibility to give instant feedback at various occasions, either like in form of like a direct feedback you give only to the person you want to give the feedback to, or some official praise that everyone in the company is able to see. Additionally, we have, for example, in Slack, a thank you channel, which shouldn't be underestimated, the effect of something like this, where you just can send a simple thank you to someone in the company of something for something that someone has done for you that helped you in your job, and that shouldn't maybe be considered as the standard way of how we work together. Like one of our company values is sleeves up, which we see as like a way of how do we collaborate with each other and look like not only in our own area of responsibility, but we see someone struggling, having a problem. I've never seen any company so far I worked with where so many people will be there trying to support you, even if it's not their area of responsibility. So Slack, of course, is important. We have a lot of tools that support our knowledge process, because that plays also a role. We use Confluence a lot, but we also have a specific knowledge management tool called Guru, because you already said, hey, before you reach out to someone, look into the existing knowledge database. And we foster knowledge inside our company a lot by using, for example, a systematic approach to knowledge management, even having a dedicated team for that is managing the whole knowledge inside the company. So these are the ways and the tools we use to deal with that.
Yeah, I think it's nice that you've got that mix of internal and like more visible and invisible feedback. It's like people can shout out the good stuff that they want to call out, and they have channels to go and maybe share the more critical or in-depth stuff that doesn't need to be seen by everyone. We're coming up to sort of the last 10 minutes now, Bastian, but one thing we didn't touch on yet is how I know you get together periodically as a team and do things like hackathons so that you are learning together, problem solving together. Tell us about that for a couple of minutes or so.
Yeah, I think this is also a very positive experience that we made especially over the last year, where in every team we at least meet up twice a year. And this is no matter if you're in the customer success team, in the people and culture department. Each department, sometimes also joint departments, make an event together where they meet up. And for example, for product engineering, we do the same. We always combine it, like you said, with a little fun activity we call the hackathon, where we basically try in 48 hours to do like a little competition of who can produce the greatest technological idea for our customers in just 48 days and show it in some form of a proof of concept. That's a very, very nice event, but it's not just about like, the productivity coming out of that and the ideas we produce, but rather really the interpersonal relationships you create in that moment. And these events, they have a huge impact on the whole team performance. It should, like, if you are a real, truly remote company, you should at least from time to time do such kind of events. That would be a really clear recommendation for myself. For me, it's not a proof point that you need to have like this interaction all the time to have great relationship with other team members, not at all. But this small moment, if you do it once or twice per year, meet up everyone, make sure they can connect. I can tell you these are extremely intensive days where you really stay up until late at night, like looking for conversations with everyone. And I have the feeling everyone is engaged. Like in a typical office scenario, it's like the same 2 or 3 people meeting up all the time, while the others go straight away home after work. Like during those meetups that we do, everyone stays there until late at night. There are great connections built. You see the team performance rise directly afterwards and be on a high level for a really long time, being positively impacted by something like this. So I can only recommend this, to have this as a important part of your remote strategy. And I think budget-wise, if you compare it to just paying an office for everyone, the costs are completely neglectable, right? Of what does it cost you to bring everyone together twice a year?
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing you mentioned earlier that I wanted to come back to, and I made a note of, is you mentioned thinking about how do we give people tools they can use to develop dispersed or global employees. You mentioned an example of maybe some customers that have created hubs. So, for example, we might not even be in the same country, or we might be distributed around the same country, but in different places. We can create hubs of those people who are doing the similar roles or can support each other to learn. Maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I think the idea of tech hubs is a very popular one at the moment, and we see a lot of our customers doing this. I mean, I told you we do it ourselves, right? In Egypt, we also by now even have a small office where people can gather. Just like they don't go there all the time, maybe once a week or every second week, but they have a place to meet up together. And I think that's the whole idea of it, right? Like if you build those hubs, you get people from similar backgrounds, and you bring them together. You should be careful not to build teams that are just like based on one certain country or region. I also think that might be a potential source of problem. But if you mix it up and you have like those small hubs and you still mix them up with some people from other regions, this can have a very positive impact, because of course it's nice to meet someone after work, right? Even if you work from your home and maybe have a joint night together at a bar or something. So it definitely makes sense. We see customers do this as well. I think also they explore certain regions where they just say, oh, wow, like, I mean, you mentioned Eastern Europe and Estonia. Also, we also work with a lot of software engineers from the Ukraine, for example. And I think this idea of like building such regional hubs makes a lot of sense. You also get used to, as a direct manager, of like working with a certain culture and adapt yourself to it as well.
Yeah, and I think Omar makes a good point in the chat there that these could also work as kind of virtual hubs. You know, you could connect people who are in different countries and can't meet physically, but they are on the same time zone. So having a way that those connect as a hub, whether in a Slack channel together where, you know, if I do need help or just someone to speak to during my time zone, then even if we don't work together in the same team or the same projects or anything like that, I can at least have people I can reach out to who might understand maybe the cultural difference a bit more, or they're just there at the same time. So I guess that's a principle that could also be applied virtually to sort of Omar's point there. And I guess for just the last couple of minutes, I know there's probably a couple more examples we can share with people. Something you mentioned earlier is a learning budget, and that's something we've seen HowNow customers use quite often, is setting people up so that they can learn what's important to them and is going to work for them in their market. So if we think about this whole point of developing people in a fast changing world where there's a lack of talent, those people need some sort of autonomy, which we know they want anyway, to work out what the big problem they're facing now is, what the best way to tackle that is, how they can apply the cultural norms and nuances, and kind of learn the things that are going to help them perform based on their understanding of how they work and where they work. And I know Buffer also do this. I read an article from Buffer where essentially wherever people were, they had a consistent budget that was, I think this is 5 years ago, so it was like $20 a month. And all they did was set guidelines about how it could be used. So yes, you can roll it over. No, you can't spend it on these sort of things. So, I mean, are you seeing that as a useful tool, setting a learning budget, giving people that autonomy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, still like autonomy and like how you spend the budget should be at least restricted. Like I think talking with your direct manager about it so that you know, yes, this is something that makes sense learning development wise, also from your manager's perspective. We have this as well. We have this learning and development budget, and every WorkMotion employee can have it. I would not only think, by the way, in like this terms of like external training you can do, like the remote academy I told you about, or like look, in my team I have something called the product academy, which is basically just a week we do a round we do every second week, where we bring in learning topics from the product world, typical skills of a product manager, typical topics. Sometimes it's use cases, sometimes it's experience from one of the product managers from the past. Everyone can suggest a topic, can prepare a topic about something he or she read, has learned in university, and experience they made in a former job. Of course, I, as one of the most senior people there, bring in a lot of topics also myself, and it fosters the common learning, the learning that we do together. And it's not like a front desk, hey, this is how you do things, but more of a discussion about, hey, what can we learn from that? How can we adapt it to our way of working? We also try to regularly exchange ideas about like sharing concept that we're doing. And the product managers always create a lot of concepts, right? And like one of the things that I'm looking for in the remote world, that you talk about those concepts with other peers of yours. So even if they don't have any responsibility for that, you can get their feedback. And I try to establish regular rounds where we present each other those concepts, where you can get the feedback and by that learn together from everyone's experience. So not only think about the external learning, I would say, like think also about how you can facilitate the internal knowledge that you have inside the company and make it available to anyone.
Yeah, no, I love that for two reasons. One, you're taking things that can seem quite abstract from the external environment and then working out together how they can be applied to the context of your business. And also you're providing a platform for them people to go and work together in the future. So I know we're close to time, but one final example from a HowNow customer I spoke to probably a year or so ago is that they were creating these cohort-based learning groups for leadership. So people would go through this course together as a group. They would troubleshoot in real time as they were coming across certain modules and topics. And then essentially what happened is those groups continued to live on past the completion of the course. So those people who were in a group together learning continued to help each other troubleshoot stuff they were coming across in the context of the business. And that, you know, it's underestimated how that can be a platform for sort of future learning as well. And unfortunately, future learning is coming to an end because we've reached the 11:58. I'm surprised by how quickly that went, Bastian. But yeah, just to sum up, if people want to find out a bit more about you or WorkMotion, we'll obviously put the links in the chat, but I guess they can just get in touch with you following the show.
Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. Go to workmotion.com to find out more about how we can help you hire globally. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you anytime afterwards. Just contact me and I can tell you a little bit more about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you're interested in obviously doing some of that stuff we spoke about at the start, like identifying markets, trying to understand the best practice for hiring people there. These are all things you can take these principles away and apply manually, but also I know you have some great tools, Bastian, that people could use to streamline the process. So yeah, I would encourage people to get in touch. I would also encourage people to go to lu.ma/HowNow, where you can find out about all of the episodes that are coming up between now and, forever. But also we're lined up until the end of the quarter. So we've got some great episodes. The next one is about L&D's role in tackling climate change. We're going to be talking about translating learning science to day-to-day L&D next month. In March, we're talking about whether we're all doing performance measurement wrong and how to rebuild it. So yeah, would really recommend people go there. And yeah, final thing to say, thank you very much, Bastian, and everyone for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Great job, Gary.